Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Amour. This is a BookTube event that I'm involved in. I'm one of the co-hosts. It was created by the Bookish Bryants, and it's designed to celebrate romance novels throughout the whole month of September. And I am a bad event co-host. I haven't been uploading regularly. I haven't been making videos every day. I haven't been making all sorts of discussion videos. And although we all got together and made a series of reading prompts or guidelines, I have been largely ignoring those prompts or guidelines. My only defense is that the whole point of Amour is to encourage you to read more romances, to read any if you don't read any of them at all, and not to be snobby towards the genre, but to see if there's anything in it that might interest you. And I'm definitely doing that. I'm definitely reading more romances. So I wanted to give you sort of an update of what I've been reading for Amour. I haven't been making many videos, but I have been reading like crazy, right here on the fainting couch, or in bed. And a lot of the romance reading that I've done in the last week has been along a theme. It wasn't intentional on my part. I didn't go looking. I just happened to notice that a theme was definitely out there among things that were ready to be bought, or that e-copies had been sent to me, or whatever. And that theme connects with a theory of mine that I have mentioned in connection with romance as a genre for a long time, which is the phylogeny of the romance genre, the family tree, the genetic history of the romance genre, which I believe most people would trace back to Georgette Heyer or Barbara Cartland, workhorses like that who wrote, 3 or 4 or 5 books a year. In Barbara Cartland's case, a lot more than that, and sort of popularized romance as regency, as lots and lots of verbal flirtation, and also as having florid, quiet, suggestive covers that appealed, at least in their marketing department's opinion, to women readers. A lot of people would, if they trace back the roots of romance, they would go to Harlequin and Mills and Boon. And then from there to those two figures who sold cartloads of books. But I've always maintained that the romance genre has one deeper root than that. I think the fons et orgo, the absolute ultimate ancestor of romance as a genre is Jane Austen. I firmly believe that I know that it's true for Georgette Heyer and for Barbara Cartland, but I firmly believe that most people who go on to become influential writers in the genre first fall in love with Jane Austen. And I almost want to say the world of Jane Austen, even though the novels of Jane Austen don't explicitly on their surface share a world. It's more a sensation. It's a feeling of reading a Jane Austen novel. And I don't know how many of you have read Jane Austen. I'm not sure how many of you share, for instance, Jordan Parsons' heretical opinion that it's not good, that Jane Austen's not good. But I bet that a lot of you who have read Jane Austen feel the same thing that I felt, for instance, every reader that I've ever known has felt, which is not just, boy, oh boy, Sense and Sensibility or Mansfield Park or especially Pride and Prejudice was really good, but also, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave the novel. I believe that effect is definitely true, and it's been attested to in letters and diary entries and essays for 200 years. It's not something I'm feeling all by myself. That feeling of, I don't want this particular magic to end is very real in Jane Austen. I don't know the exact anatomy of it. I'm not sure how she manages to do it. Her novels are, after all, fairly different in their plot and circumstance and character, but it's definitely true. And I think that accounts for a large amount of romance, is people wanting to recreate that world. And then romance branched out from there, but I argue that the archetypes that you find in Jane Austen, the enemies to lovers, the flirtatious banter, the second chance romance, all sorts of things like that. Almost all of the category prompts for Amour that I am so rudely ignoring, in fact, I believe that if you trace them back, they all start there. They all start with that one writer. So I sort of expect that I'm going to see Jane Austen echoes even in biker romances set very firmly in the 21st century. But there's another kind of romance that can echo Jane Austen's novels, that can try to claw its way back into the magic of Jane Austen's world. I firmly believe, I know there are a lot of Emma fans out there, but I firmly believe that the novel that casts that spell more than any other is Pride and Prejudice. And there's another way to try to claw your way back into that kind of magic, apart from writing a romance that sort of echoes it the way Barbara Cartland might do. And that is to write a Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice pastiche novel that is explicitly set in that world. So you're not echoing any of the themes, you're reviving the characters and taking another look at them. And I don't know if I can adequately describe how big that genre is, that subgenre. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice pastiche novels. It's huge. Just in the month of September, and I think maybe there are a couple of these from October, there were a slew of books. It would take me a week to read through them all. I wanted to show you some of them. There's An Appearance of Goodness by Heather Mall. I don't want to block the baby. Let me see if I can come over here. So she's sleeping peacefully. There's Darcy and the Spring Surprise by Andrea Duke. These are mostly self-published. I'm not sure I remember the last time, if ever, that a major romance publishing house here in America, Avon or St. Martin's, I'm not sure I remember the last time, if ever, that they did a Jane Austen pastiche novel. They do well in mainstream publishing. We see one or two of them every year. But here's another one, Fitzwilliams Explains. A lot of these, you'll notice, are Pride and Prejudice variations. So these aren't the writers going back and telling one particular character's story, adding a lot to it, but being careful to be faithful to the written text in Pride and Prejudice. Rather, it's them just remaking things. This next one is by Shanna Granderson, and it's part of the Take Charge series, where she has a whole bunch of these things. I've only read one. The one in this series where so-and-so takes charge, someone from the Pride and Prejudice cast of characters, under the explicit assumption, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure, that the explicit assumption here is that in reality it's Mr. Darcy who takes charge. So it can't be him, but it can be anybody else. Here it's Jane Bennet takes charge. So yet another Pride and Prejudice variation. Here is a variation by Ali Scott called A Man of Good Fortune. Someone approaching a country house with one solitary rose. We have One Little White Lie, which is by Lear Newton and is another Pride and Prejudice variation. And keep in mind, this isn't over the course of a year. This is over the course of a month. There's another Pride and Prejudice variation, That Bennett Chit by Jenny Penno. Variation here can mean almost anything. If you go, for instance, the other day, I mentioned fanfiction.net. If you go to fanfiction.net or sites like it, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of Pride and Prejudice stories. Here we have Mr. Darcy. This is by Maria Dashwood. We are at liberty to believe that might be a pen name. This is called Mr. Darcy's Thunderous Passion. And it also is a variation. And a lot of times variation means only that you're changing the action slightly, but some variations change the action quite a bit. I've seen Pride and Prejudice variations that change the action enormously. Then we have another Pride and Prejudice variation. This is by Michelle Darcy. Again, we are at liberty to believe that is a pen name. This is undoubtedly by design. And it also has just a stately pile in the background. Some of these things are just copyright-free images off Wikipedia. So the easiest thing in the world to put on your self-published book. So these things, I've read, the ones that I've shown you, I've read 2 of them, but I'm going to read them all. They're not so much in the way of an investiture of time and energy, so I'm going to read them all. But there, in addition to that, in this Autumn Amour roundup, there are things that I have read. One of which is Tentacle Romance. I tried my best to explain the allure of tentacle romances in an earlier video. Needless to say, tentacle romance is not part of the prompts of Autumn Amour, nor do any of my co-hosts read it or endorse it. And I'm not sure that I endorse it, but I have to admit it has a weird kind of allure. So I do read it. And I read one called by Scarlett Cox. Again, we can assume that that is a pen name. This is called Tokushima Tentacles. And believe it or not, I know you won't believe it, but believe it or not, this is very entertaining, and not in necessarily the ways you would expect. It's about a young man who goes to Japan to teach English. He doesn't know Japanese much, just a tiny amount, and he expects that he is going to a big city, but instead he is farmed out to Tokushima, on the shore, a long way away from anywhere. And it seems like the dashing of a lot of his extracurricular hopes. But he thinks the least he can do is enjoy the beach, since he's right nearby. And one day he goes to the beach, at the beginning of this novel, he goes to the beach, only to be told in broken English that the beach is closed, that the ocean is closed, that this is a time period when the locals do not allow swimming. And the main character doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand who can shut down the ocean, he actually says. Who can close the ocean? So he goes up the coast just a little bit until he's not around anybody, determined more than ever to go for a swim. And he does. He strips down to his swimsuit, and he goes out and wades in the water. He starts to dip in and dive in. It's very cool. It's wonderfully refreshing. He says over and over again in the opening pages of this novel that this is crazy. Anybody who thinks this isn't perfect swimming weather is nuts. He does notice some seaweed floating around. But he doesn't think anything of it. It's no big deal. It's not gonna interrupt his pleasure. And then he notices that the seaweed is moving, and that it all seems to be moving with one will, with one mind, and that it seems interested in him, only not aggressively. It seems to want to entwine about him. Booktube, in Tentacle Romance, there's quite a bit of entwining. It seems to entwine about him, and I realize that we're a PG channel here, so I will just say he finds it very enjoyable. And he's starting to wonder what on earth is going on, and finally he says out loud, what on earth is going on here? He's been in oceans before. Seaweed has never acted this way. He says, what on earth is going on? And he is answered by a voice. A thunderously deep voice that may or may not be mental. It may or may not be just telepathic. A voice claiming to be a Japanese sea god who takes him to task and says, well, didn't you see the signs that humans posted all over here that say don't swim at this time of year? And yet you came in anyway. Why? And the main character says that he wanted to, and that it's been pleasant. And the sea god says, well, did you enjoy the experience? And he said, yes, I did very much. And the sea god basically says, well, then I'll see you later. You're free to come back. Now, the main character gets dressed and goes back home to his apartment and immediately gets on Google to look up this god that has given him his name, that has talked all about this. And that contrast between the little sensual introduction that we get to the sea god's wandering tentacles and the real world. The main character has colleagues, he has friends, he has a landlady, he has the internet. That conflict, that sort of contrast is, believe it or not, done really well in this book. The point I'm trying to make about Tokushima Tentacles is that it's much, much better than it needs to be. There are certain things that a tentacle romance is there to do. If you are reading tentacle romances and you don't like those things, you're wasting your time. You should go elsewhere, read something else. But it's been my experience. My experience is not great. It's not as great as my experience with the Omegaverse, although it's catching up, is that it is possible to self-publish a tentacle romance that does only those things that it's here to do and precious little else. And boom, you've still got your money and you'll still sell your book. This does a lot more than that. So I was pleased. Here, let's much to your relief, let's stop talking about tentacle romances just in general and talk about the Regency instead. Because I read 2 Regencies as well. Uh, I read a book from, I think, last year called How to Survive a Scandal by Samara Parish, which is has the typical modern Regency cover. It's well done, but there's a lot of disrobing. Usually in modern Regency covers, either the woman has no top on or the man does. The old style Regency romances that I love so much would never dream of doing such a thing. But it isn't just a wardrobe malfunction. The books also get straight down to the down and dirty on the springs of the carriage in no time at all. Whereas the classic old Regency style thing, like the kind that I'm saying derives ultimately from Jane Austen, would never do that. But this is it's a meet cute story. It's an accidental meeting, accidental lovers story, and through a convolution of the plot, the accidental way that the main characters meet forces them to pretend that they're married. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of it, especially since the important part of the book is that the main character, Lady Amelia, is the belle of high society. She is everything that she's supposed to be: perfectly finished, absolutely beautiful, expensively attired, with all the hopes and expectations of landing a lord. And the male main character is not part of the upper crust at all. He's not part of the landed gentry. He's a working man, and he resents the landed gentry. That's rare. That doesn't. Maybe it's not as rare now in the 21st century as it was in 80 million regencies before it, but it's still not the norm. So there's a lot. I mean, they don't know each other when they are flung into intimacy. They don't know each other. So that's an obstacle to overcome anyway. But in addition to that, there are societal obstacles to overcome, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I know Samara Parish. I'm always tempted to just fire off an email to Sarah at the Bookish Knitter every time I encounter an author. Hey, is this author good? Hey, am I going to like this author? Or did I get a really good book? But she does have a life. We can't all be bombarding her with emails. But in addition to How to Survive a Scandal, I also read another Regency novel called How to Survive a Scandal. This is by Christine Merrill, and it's in the Harlequin historical line, which now looks like this. The Harlequin historicals for a long, long time had artwork for the cover. They had secondary artwork on the back that was different from the front cover. They were visually lavish. Now, the Harlequin historical line and virtually every other kind of romance, except for the now ubiquitous cartoon covers, uses photographs for their covers. They put models in period costume. And as you might be able to tell if you know your history from this cover, the hero in this novel is a military man. He's a captain, and he's recovering from his wounds. And the novel makes a point of telling us over and over again, a very 21st century thing. The novel makes a point of telling us that most of his wounds are psychological, and he is totally inward focused. Maybe not on healing. We get the strong sensation in the first 50 pages of the book that maybe a lot of his inwardness is that he has sort of fetishized his wounds, that maybe he doesn't want to heal. But he very much is not thinking about, the rounds, making the rounds of high society until he meets the female main character, who is a firecracker, and who in very short order in the course of the book gets herself into the scandal in the title of the book that he either has to ignore or help her to get out of. And it's utterly charming. It's a Harlequin historical. These are Harlequin category romances. You get 4 historicals a month, 4 Harlequin Presents a month, 4 Harlequin Romances a month, all that sort of stuff. If you watch Sarah's channel, Sarah at the Bookish Knitter is the world's biggest category romance fan. If you watch her channel, you will hear all about those. And as I've often pointed out, just as most readers of other genres reflexively condescend to romance readers, a lot of romance readers reflexively condescend to category romances. You have a lot of romance readers out there who will say, well, yeah, I might read a romance novel now and again, but I wouldn't stoop to a Harlequin. This book was in every way better than the other How to Survive a Scandal. This was not a bad book, but this was in every way better. And I could tell on almost every chapter of this book why it was better. It was specifically because of how corseted these things are. The category romances have a set page limit. They have I would imagine, a very set playbook of what can and cannot happen. And I would imagine, a very tight timeline, considering that some of the ladies who write Harlequin historicals do 5 a year. Under those circumstances, given those parameters, you have to decide what you will do and how skillfully you will do it. And this was just better. It does. I think when you are presented with those kind of restrictions, you have two choices. You can either go on autopilot, and I've read quite a few category romances that were written that way. That's, I think, how they got some of their reputation. You can go on autopilot, or you can excel. You can cut all the fat off what you're doing and just get down to what you really want. And a lot of these authors do that. The Harlequin historicals, their category romances for the historicals are so enjoyable, most of them, for me. And this one was. And I think that might be it in terms of romances. Yeah, a whole bunch of Jane Austen that I either have read or will read. How to Survive a Scandal twice, and Tokushima Tentacles. So that is it for my romance reading recently for Autumn Amour. I will knock down the Jane Austen pastiche novels that I haven't got to yet. Although you do 4 or 5 of those, especially 4 or 5 of those over a short amount of time, like this weekend. Even I get burned out of Pemberley and kind of want to ease off on the Jane Austen pastiche novels for a while. I don't think in the mainstream publishing will do Jane Austen pastiche novels of one kind or another. Joe Baker's Longbourn, I have praised a million times on this channel. But there have been lots of others. The other Miss Austen's sister, or the other Bennett girl, or there are a bunch of high-profile things like that. I don't think any are coming out the rest of this year in America. So this will be all for my Jane Austen pastichery, I think, for this year. Because if I read all of these in a batch, I don't think I'll read any others. Though you never know. I say that. I say that, and then I do it anyway. But anyway, that's your Autumn Amour update. I have no idea what this week's category is. I have no idea what next week's category is. I'm just going to continue reading romances. I will read another romance tonight, and I will report back on it as soon as I can. Thank you, BookTube.